Hello, good. It's an early morning here with Excelcia Music Publishing, and we're talking to all four of the editors at Excelcia Music Publishing. We have myself, Tyler Arcari, Blair Bielawski, and Jamey Ray. And today we have Lori Schwartz Reichl, who's going to interview us and talk to us about and ask us questions about our process in selecting literature that we're going to publish and the editing process and any questions that she's interested in knowing about how a publisher really works. So Lori, thanks for doing this for us. Here we go.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with you, Larry. Why don't you
All
tell
right.
us a little bit about yourself and your role with Excelcia and what else you do musically in our profession?
Sure. Of course, a lot of people know me as a composer, and I've written for publications since 1992 in marching band and jazz band, or it's not jazz band, sorry, marching band, concert band, and orchestra. And I've done dabbled in a few choir pieces over the years. I spent the last 24, I was a band director in an early part of my career in middle school and college. I've been in publishing since 1995 and editor at Warner Brothers Publications, and then at Carl Fisher, and now heading up Excelcia Music. Started the company about 2 years ago. I've been editing a lot of music for years, and thousands of pieces that have crossed my desk or come across my email. And so I've seen it all. I've seen the good, the bad, the different, all kinds of different things. And I've tried to coach people along the way as to, even better ways that they can do submissions and stuff like that. So that's sort of the brief thing. I still do a lot of commissions. I still do a lot of guest conducting and stuff like that as well.
Great. And Tyler, as the instrumental music editor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what else you're doing musically in our profession and for the company?
Okay, so I was a band director for a few years in Alabama, and I was also writing, and so I got a call to come do this, and I was, as a former teacher, I'm sure that thought of leaving to go do something that isn't teaching is kind of scary. And the way he explained it to me when he offered the job was that you're going to, in some different way, be able to affect students either through your writing or through publishing music. And so that was a big draw for me, the fact that at a brand new company that's starting out with the goal of trying to be different, I would be able to still get that achievement of helping and shaping musicians like I would have as a teacher. I currently work a lot of production inside the company as far as the projects that come through after they're done with editing to get them ready for publication in print, as well as picking and going through instrumental music. There is a lot of team effort for editing in the office. So not only does Larry get involved, but so does Diana. She usually handles string editing for Boeing and stuff like that, so she also gets involved. So there is somewhat of a team effort involved too, and that's about what I do. Little things here and there as well.
Excellent, thank you. Blair, you are our newly appointed jazz editor coming on board for the company in December. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for the company, and what you're doing professionally?
Sure. I started in publishing, I think I just mentioned, in 1983. I was working for a small publishing company called Jensen that was eventually bought by Hal Leonard. So I ended up working as an editor and arranger at Hal Leonard for 17 years. And then I went to Lorenz and started a jazz division there. And I was there for 10 years. And in the midst of all doing that, while I was working at Jensen, I was teaching high school band, which was fun being in publishing and teaching at the same time, because literally I would take stuff from the office to school and say, no, this doesn't work. Or yeah, it does work. So it was really interesting to see the practical applications of it just like immediately. So what I'm doing at Excelcia now is trying to complement the concert band and the orchestra and the choral catalogs with the jazz catalog that's ensemble music. So we brought in some writers from across the country, Steve Wiest and Jack Cooper, and a couple of Excelcia concert band writers who are also jazz guys. So we're just developing that catalog.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Jamey, if you could do the same, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and what else you're doing in our profession.
Sure. My full-time job, I am a professor at Rollins College. I'm finishing up my 10th year actually this month, which is crazy. And I teach music technology and music theory and vocal jazz group there and anything recording related. And started singing and writing for Disney about, I don't know, 8 years ago or so. And then created an a cappella group called Voctive that is touring and recording and doing different things. And then Larry came to me and asked me to be the choral editor of for this company. And about, I don't know, almost 2 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, a little
And
more.
yeah, and I have always been a huge choral nerd my entire life. I was excited about the idea of choral music all the time. And so when he came and asked me, I was thrilled to have any idea of or any part in picking songs or just getting into this world. And so I'm a big fan of choral music and choral composers. And so being part of this was definitely exciting for me.
Great. Thank you. So as an educator and an author myself, I have little knowledge in the compositional process. I've never created my own music or anything like that, but I do a lot of collaborations with composers, and I'm starting to learn a lot more things than I knew before. So let's get started with some of these general questions. Are submissions all made electronically? And I'm assuming that's the case, but have you ever gotten any that are not electronic when a composer is presenting their music to you? Larry, would you start?
I can start with that. Yeah, I mean, when we started this company, we made the conscious decision that we wanted it to all be electronically because, you know, in the old days and for many years, I would get many submissions sent to me. And then there's the process of, yeah, Tyler sent me some that way. And there's always the process of then if you say no, you have to send it back. You ask them to give you, you know, a postage paid envelope to send it back in, but they don't always do that. So, you know, there's a lot of hassle. And I worked from home for Carl Fisher for the last 15 years before I started Excelcia. So all that stuff came to me at my house. So in order to ship it, you know, as packages and, you know, CDs and all that stuff, I'd have to go down to the post office to mail all that stuff back, type up a nice letter and all that. So the electronically certainly makes it a lot easier. I think it makes it a lot easier for the composers too. They can submit, you know, as soon as they're ready, send a PDF, upload a MP3, and you know we then have it. And then it also helps for me. The hard part I had was, especially when people wanted to start sending things electronically, like through email, it got to the point where it was very cumbersome to try to keep track of the submissions in the sea of your inbox. So it's much easier the way we do it. We have a submission page. They fill out a form, they upload their materials, and then that gets saved in a spreadsheet, in a database, and their music goes immediately to a Dropbox. So we can keep track of it a lot easier and say, oh, did we listen to that one? Did we not listen to that one? Did we reject this one? Would you accept that one? And then we can be a little more careful about that whole process.
Great. So my first few questions are somewhat general. So Larry, you might want to answer the first few of these, but are you selecting music per season or per year? How often are you requesting for new compositions to be submitted?
Well, we generally say that our season, as it were, is we kind of like go in a school year, you know, mentality. Like we're getting ready to release all the music that's going to be for next school year, 2021 school year. So once we get that done, then we start all over again. So we actually say on the submission page that really May is when we start looking at the music for the next year. We usually close that up about the middle of October or so. And then we have to then from then on produce that music and get it ready for recording sessions that happen in January, early February. Blair's a little behind on that because he started late in the process this year. But I'm sure we'll move to that, you know, for him next year. And then we do all the work again to get it ready to release, to get printed so we can have it out in late spring, early summer, so that people can start to select the music for the next school year. So we're really on a school year function. Do we get submissions all year long? Sure. They don't necessarily read on the top that says we select between May and October, and they upload it anyway, and that's fine. We have a good way to keep track of that now. But
do you look at it when it comes in, or do you save it until that?
We usually have to save it because we're just so overwhelmed. And again, we're a small company. Yeah, we have 4 editors for 4 different areas, but Blair and Jamey have other jobs too, and full-time jobs. So in our office, there's literally 4 of us. 1 sales, 1 production and editing, 1 administrative assistant, and myself. So it's a lot to put out, with a small group of people. And so there's just really not time to, as soon as it comes in, to review it. Sometimes it sits, and we even say on the website, you got to give us at least 3 months and sometimes more before, you hear a response. So don't get, disappointed if you don't hear in a day.
So this is a great time to be doing this video now, as you're trying to attract composers to submit their music. So fantastic.
Sure.
How many compositions would you say you get during that time frame through all the genres?
Boy, Tyler might be able to answer that better than me. I know over the years, for me at Carl Fisher, for example, it would be hundreds throughout the year. Tyler, I don't know that we've reached that kind of capacity, but it's probably at least 100, maybe more than that.
Yeah, definitely that, just organically or more, depending on the year and time. So yeah, I get them. It's a slow trickle too.
So Larry, what's some of the general procedures for selecting? Ooh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sometimes the video's freezing, but it seems like the audio.
What are some of the general procedures for selecting music for publication? Are you looking for a certain amount of measures? Are you looking for a handful of grade levels? That sort of thing.
Well, that depends is the answer. And because that depends on the grade level and the difficulty level that you're looking for. We have guidelines for all the areas, band, orchestra, and jazz band. Choral's a little bit more flexible in the fact that voicing determines sometimes the difficulty, and Jamey can probably speak to that a little bit better. But so you want to find music that fits the need of that grade level. So we actually have technical guidelines. You can only go this high in the trumpet, and this low in the clarinet or whatever. Can't go above the break in grade half and grade 1, for example, in clarinet. So we have that all spelled out. And yes, we do have, how many measures as a guideline. That doesn't mean we don't break that sometimes if the music dictates that. But that's all predicated on also, for, I think, a little kid on an instrument, how long they can have the instrument on their face. How much endurance do they have? You can't ask a kid who's played for 10 weeks to play a 5-minute piece. It's just, they can't do it. It's not physically possible. They don't have the muscles to be able to have the endurance to do that. So we take that into account. And those, guidelines of things we have developed over a long period of time. They're pretty similar with most of the publishers. I mean, my start in Warner Brothers, I saw what the guidelines were there. When I went to Carl Fisher, I tweaked those, adapted those to what I thought maybe was missing in those. And now Excelcia, even a little bit more tweak, a little bit more changes in that too. Orchestras, we haven't spoken about that too much. It's about also when they learn certain bowing techniques. There's certain, the certain notes that they learn first, like you really avoid at the early levels, middle C sharp, because that would be an altered fingering on the instruments. And that's a lot of stuff that I've had to learn over time because I'm not a string player, but I listen to the experts on things like that and make those decisions. Jamey, do you want to maybe comment on the vocal stuff, the choral?
Yeah, the choral side is a little less, structured, to be completely honest. I don't necessarily, no publisher that I know of has guidelines that they will post for composers that say it has to be this many measures, it has to be this range. Some of them inside will have certain ranges that they're specifically looking for different voicings, like SAB is different than 3-part mixed. Because 3-part mixed is usually going to be geared more towards a male voice that may or may not be changed, and SAB is more geared towards an actual baritone. And so SAB or a 3-part mix has to be more limited. And but the biggest thing, the main thing that I'm looking for in any piece is accessibility. So many composers want to write Eric Whitacre, and they want to write these pieces that have 13-part cluster chords for 7 minutes. And it's like, no one's going to buy that. No one's going to sing. I mean, Eric Whitacre sells his stuff because his name is Eric Whitacre, and you're not. So, I mean, people aren't going to want to buy that stuff. So it's not, if it's not accessible, then people aren't going to want it. So I'm looking for things that are, that a middle school director with a moderate group can look at and say, yeah, we can successfully do this. Not, we can barely make it through it and it'll sound terrible. But this is simple without sounding boring. And that's what's trying to find pieces that are accessible but still interesting. Because the kids, it's hard enough to get kids excited about anything. But to have them excited about the song that they're singing that is about love and they're in 7th grade as a boy that would rather be in any other room at that moment, then let's not put out a love song for middle school boys. We're going to find something else that's a little bit more textually appropriate and exciting for them.
So, well, okay, well, thank you, Jamey. Blair, do you want to let us know a few specific characteristics that you're specifically looking for when choosing jazz compositions?
Sure. Everything that Larry and Jamey said applies. You know, there are certain practical things that it would be great to be able to have just write whatever you want, but that unfortunately isn't the case because there's nobody that can either play it or is able to or can afford it, or there's only one band in the world that can play it, and it's not worth it. So some of the things I look for in jazz are original sounding ideas and maybe a slightly different take on what you might expect, you know, music that turns left when you don't think it's going to, and just music that's interesting. And we have 4 grade levels in jazz right now. And one of the interesting things about jazz is that the whole rhythm section element comes into play. So that's something that a lot of times a non-rhythm section player writing for jazz ensemble has a hard time notating a piano part or a bass part or a guitar part or a drum part. So I spend a lot of time looking at rhythm section parts just to see if they make sense and how they're written and constructed, and if they work cohesively together and if they work with the rest of the band. There's a couple things I do look for that will kind of make me stop looking at a piece. First of all, I don't listen to it right away. I spend a lot of time looking at the score and trying to analyze the form and the structure and where the composer is going. And anything that starts smelling of trite is less than fun. Like a jazz ensemble piece that goes 40 bars and then starts a long improvisation section is probably, I mean, unless you have a really great soloist, that's not such a great thing for most average bands. So I like to really look for ensemble music first.
Tyler, do you want to add a little bit to that? Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Sure. So everyone's kind of talked about I guess, as a publisher that focuses on the smaller grade levels from 4 down, we are always kind of guidelines set towards the educational side of things. And on top of that, in order to sell broadly as a company, which we still are, and of course our composers want to sell more than not, we also focus on the educational aspect because it will appeal to a broader, more average group. So for instance, the way our 2s are set up is to appeal to high school more at the top end. I'm sorry, high school more at the bottom end and middle school more at the top end of, I guess, age and skill level. So they've talked about that kind of stuff. So that is a very big guiding factor to the music. But I'll get a little bit more personal since everyone else has kind of covered that. I try and listen. So if I'm evaluating younger music for students, I try and listen to see if I can hear if the composer is enjoying what they're doing. Because it is challenging to write to a guideline. You know, you're requiring yourself to be creative with restrictions. And I mean, throughout history, the best inventions have always come from people who have had obstacles to overcome. So you do have a creativity spike if you can get over that hump of I have to write this here and still try and be somewhat artistic. So if you listen to music, and you can tell, you can listen to music and tell if the composer's enjoying what they're doing. If it sounds to me like a composer is having to just destroy their musical sensibilities to fit into a mold in order to get something published, then, you know, that's something that is going to be forefront in my mind when I'm thinking about this piece. Not necessarily that there's anything wrong with the piece of music, but that, you know, we want composers to still be able to express themselves as much as possible with those guidelines. And, you know, we throw around all kinds of words that mean things to us personally that may mean things to other people outside that isn't. When I talk about that, I think about, you know, if you can take a melody that's sophisticated, which is just a developed melody, and still incorporate it so that it's appropriate for students who are learning, and we want to be able to play more advanced, more embellished melodies, then I call that sophistication. And so I want composers to feel like they can still be sophisticated, even at a grade 1. You know, and it's not a quality of what they're writing, it's just how they feel about it and how they structure it. And so that's kind of my starting point when I listen to a piece of music. Does it feel like they're enjoying it?
I might add, since we really talked, because the question was more focused on, you know, the technical aspects of how we, you know, grade level and all that stuff. If that's just the starting point in terms of, you know, we could receive a piece that we think is, you know, the greatest piece since, you know, Gustav Holst or Percy Grainger. But if it's supposed to be a grade 2 piece and it has, you know, high C's in the trumpet, well, then we either have to edit that out or we have to go back to the composer and say, you're going to have to rework the piece to make that work. So the point is, I'm saying, is we still are looking for great music. We just are looking for great music that fits what the students are capable of at that point in their development.
So you're obviously selecting music from those composers who are submitting to you for possible publication, but what efforts are you making to attract new composers for each of the different genres? Jamey, would you like to start?
I, again, because of my choral background and the singing that I do in the world that I'm in, I'm constantly reaching out to people that I know because I get submissions a lot, and a lot of times they do fall, the submissions, just because we are a new company, they do fall into that category that Tyler was talking about, where people are just trying to send us stuff to get things published and don't necessarily, haven't figured out what it is that we're looking for, which is why I think this is a good thing. So, but what I'm doing is constantly reaching out to other composers that I have even grown up singing their music and saying, hey, I'm a fan doing this, would you be interested? And I've surprisingly gotten really good responses from some pretty good name composers that, I mean, between Russ Robinson and Greg Gilpin and Patty Drennan and Ruth Schramm, I mean, having people like that interested in sending me things, and then some other new composers that I've become aware of either as their teacher or just a friend that I know that they're capable of writing, being able to kind of bring them in to say, hey, I've sung your stuff before. Have you ever thought about publishing it? And here's an opportunity to do it. So there's different, I'm thankful for the different connections that I have to get me people like that, because I think that it's those kinds of things that will help build this catalog that will then attract more of those people on their own without us having to go and find them.
Blair and Tyler, would you say the same thing, or are you making additional efforts to attract new composers?
You want to go first, Blair, or me?
Sure. A lot of times there are some of the established composers are university professors. So I'll reach out to them and look for talented students that might be interested in getting music published, just to bring some fresh blood into the mix. And those teachers, they will only recommend their best students because they don't want to look silly by having kids send me stuff that's unusable. So I found that's been helpful. And obviously going to conventions and just the jazz community is pretty small. So hanging out with people at conventions is a good way to find new blood as well.
So my teacher growing up in school told me something that stuck with me that I try and use. He said that from the second you write your first note, you're a composer. Because being a composer doesn't have to do with anyone else's opinion. If you're going to take the journey to write, that's you, and you're a composer. So I've done kind of a multifaceted approach to trying to find it. When I was going through it, most publishers say do not accept outside submissions, or unsolicited, I think is the word they use. So I had to send all my stuff through channels of people that I knew. So, you know, if my teacher knew people like Larry or Bob Sheldon and stuff like that, they would say, here's their email. I'll send an email ahead of time. And then that. So there's that was a huge who you know. So when I started here, I started tackling it a different way. Not only did the company do it too, the company has an open submission process, and it's an invitation on our, if you go to our website, on our composer page at the very end, it's got a blank photo and it says the next can be you. You know, but to engage people, there's two things I think that are important. One is visibility. People need to be able to look at our composers and think, I can do that too, which means that they have to have people that they can look at that look like them, which means it can't be all old people. It's got to be some young people, and everybody can't look the same, because we want to attract everybody, which is the same thing. Anyone can submit. And so I went on Facebook and I started finding my friends who were young that were writing, either for other companies or just by themselves. Because again, you don't have to be a published composer to be a composer. You're already a composer. So I would go and search them out and say, do you know it? Hi, I'm so-and-so. I would love to look at some of your music. Sometimes they would say, great. Sometimes they would say, no, thank you, I'm not interested. I'd like to self-publish. Or no, thank you, I'm not interested. I want to go this route. And sometimes they say yes. And so a lot of the composers that we have picked up are because we've kind of gone out to look. And so it's a good mix of both. And so it's a little bit of that. Not only that, but when I go out to do honor bands, I try and only program people who are alive as best I can. And then I try and call them in the middle of it and let the kids talk to them, and let them see that these people are alive and that they can talk to the students about writing music. And so hopefully get them engaged so that when they get older, they'll want to write music because they've seen that people who are alive are doing it.
Awesome. I'm going to move in my house and see
I
if
thought for a minute we were on an episode of Ghost Hunters.
Although my toddlers are about to eat breakfast, so I don't know if they're going to make an appearance in a moment or not. But we'll see if this is any better.
I would add to Tyler's thing is that, yeah, we're always seeking new people. And I want to emphasize that the reason why I started Excelcia and the reason why I wanted it to be focused in a certain way is because I wanted us to be different with how we treat composers. I always tell the story that I almost called the company Composer First Publishing. I decided not to do that because I didn't want it to feel like I was alienating the educators, because obviously the educators are really important to the process too. But I've felt like over the years that the composers have just become a commodity for a lot of companies, and that's not right. It's not fair. I understand why a lot of publishers want to self-publish, because they haven't felt like publishers have treated them with respect, have promoted their music in the way that they would like them to, haven't gotten up to speed with new technology and social media and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what I wanted to change. So when we're trying to find new composers, we're trying to find ones that we can latch onto and help them grow as a person. So I think it's also important to add that we don't want to select one piece by one random composer and then poof, we never hear from them again. We also are trying really hard to see if we think a composer that we decide to select music of has the ability and the talent to contribute more than one piece, that he has the talent and the ability to grow, and that we can help them and help them manage their career, so that can be longevity. Because unfortunately, in this business of publishing, especially for school groups, is you have to have a little bit of girth, a little bit of size of your catalog, of your output as a composer, in order to make an impact in the market. If you come out with one piece and then 4 years later you come out with a second piece, teachers are not going to know your name. It's going to take time to develop the name. Because you know what? Excelcia Music doesn't really mean anything to anybody. It's the composer that they want. And they'll take it written on a napkin if they like that person's music. So it doesn't really matter, you know, if it's us or Carl Fisher or Warner Brothers or Hal Leonard or Alfred or any of those. It's the composer. They are, in my opinion, they are the brand.
Wonderful. So, Tyler, you alluded to this a little bit. So, you know, I have to be very honest. I'm a woman looking at 4, you know, white men who are editors for this particular company. So how are you promoting diversity in the composers that you are selecting? Or how are you promoting that diversity by seeking out diverse composers?
So one of the things that I think is an issue, and of course I am not an expert, but what I noticed when I was teaching and what I've noticed when I go out and do honor bands is that if, let's just scenario, because I see a lot of programs, I'm sure you see a lot of programs too, and if you look at those programs, the representation on those programs is pretty much the same. Since we're being candid with that, it's all white men for the most part. So one of the things I think we do well at Excelcia, we're trying to do more of, is that when we post our composers, we post them all. And we post their picture. And we post that in hopes that people will see those people, because visibility is important. And so not only have we sought out people who don't look like us 4, but we are also trying to make sure that when we market, every time we market, that we market everyone. We don't just pick one person that might be selling music better than me and then not market me too. You know, we'll market everybody at the same time. And that's important because everyone needs to be visible. And what publishers, I think, sometimes will do is they will only market what they think is going to be profitable. But the profitability for us as a composer-led company is getting more composers. And over the years, we're going to want more composers. So we want young kids to see that there are people that look like them that are writing music. And it's not perfect. It's not the numbers that are where we want them to be, because it doesn't look like if you walk out in the world. If you walk outside, that's not what it looks like right now. So it is always a goal to get more, as it should be, more balanced. So visibility, I think, is one of our biggest assets in that regard.
And for those of you who are looking at music and maybe you don't pick a particular composer because maybe they're still learning or they're still grasping a concept, what are efforts that you are making to encourage them to resubmit in the future? Or how are you helping them along with the editing process to eventually get them published? Blair, would you like to start?
Sure. It's been interesting. I've actually had a couple composers submit music that we've gone back and forth several times, and I'll say, well, I really like the concept of this, but this part is too hard, and you know, the rhythm here is sort of awkward, and it'll go back and forth several times before we come up with something that's like, okay, this can work. And so if a piece has musical merit, sometimes it's worth going the extra mile to figure out how you can make it work within the guidelines without sacrificing the musical integrity of the piece. So that, I mean, that's something that I think that goes on with all of us, you know, this back and forth between composers and ourselves.
Jamey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, there's as a choral editor, one thing that I see a lot, because especially a lot of times when younger students go through some sort of composition program in school, it's heavily based on instrumental writing. And as a choral editor, I can immediately tell when I'm looking at a piece that was written by an instrumentalist. And the first thing that I will come back and say is, here are a list of things to literally just edit, change in this, and also maybe lyrically change in this. And for the future, singers will, this is a rhythm that instrumentalists write. You don't tie over an eighth note for a singer. That's not how you write it. That's how an instrumentalist writes it. And to say, don't do that anymore, and people will see you more as a choral composer. Also, syllabic stress is a big thing that instrumentalists will send me that I'm trying to work through to reach back to them and say, hey, we're going to move this to this beat, we're going to move this to this beat, and we're going to try. Or sometimes I will give them suggestions, and sometimes if I feel like it's, hey, the entire song needs to be revisited, relook at syllabic stress and resend this to me. And I think actually maybe 3 or 4 in this catalog started out that way. It was, whether it was instrumentalists or just people that weren't necessarily, if they were singers, they weren't people who had really studied scores to see, these are things I need to really pay attention to. But the idea, like Tyler was saying, it was good. And I liked the bass of the song. So just reached back out and said, if you were to fix these things and resubmit it, I think that it would be much better. Yeah.
Great. Blair, do you have anything to add, or Tyler?
Yeah, so you're talking about when they submit music, if it's something that we're not going to be able to take for that catalog year, that how do we nurture that person?
Right, or how do you reach out to them and encourage them to continue submitting?
Yeah. And then I'm assuming with that you want to know how often that happens among the hundreds that we get. So if every single submission that gets sent in, unless we make a mistake, which we do every once in a while, gets a letter back, which is something that it didn't happen to me a lot when I was submitting, when I was starting out. And those letters are tailored and they're specific after, so we have a company line that we do, so it's professional. And then at the bottom, I add pertinent information. So every letter we send says, please revisit this because, and then feel free in the future to submit. And so that's just a basic start. So we never tell anybody, no, never come back, or no, never come back with this piece. But past that, we keep track of people who are promising. We send back feedback on almost anything. If anyone asks for more clarity, we give them more clarity. I have a handful of people. I know Larry has bunches of people that he has been helping throughout the years that slowly come forward and come back. One of our composers, Pete Ciano, had been submitting to Larry for years and years and years. And that every time, and I can attest to this, when I submitted to Larry and got rejected, because the first time I submitted to Larry, it was a flat rejection. He sent back an email that was this long with suggestions on every piece. It was all, we can't take this, here's why. We can't take this, here's why. And so things like that, without pestering people and just going past what I think is a comfort zone and offering our input. Because I mean, honestly, when somebody sends me something, I go, I assume you want some opinion, but you don't want all the opinion. You're not wanting me to just lecture. So without overstepping, we always try and be encouraging, and here's why. So there's that.
And I would think that there's composers appreciate that individualized feedback to an extent of what they could do to resubmit and possibly get to that level of publication.
That depends. That depends.
Say that again.
Some composers will run with that feedback and come back to you, like he talked about Pete Ciano, come back to you yearly with more pieces for you to look at. Other composers, they disappear, you never hear from them again, and then through the grapevine, you kind of hear they were really mad about the fact that you gave them this list of comments because they loved their piece just how it was. So, you know, you have to temper that sometimes with, you're really, as an editor, you're putting yourself out there saying, hey, we like this, but here's the list.
So they're acting like a typical student. They either take the feedback or they
sometimes
don't.
And the thing they have to understand in the world of having music published for schools, you're going to be edited. You're going to have to look at your music, and you're probably going to be asked to make changes to your music. There's maybe a handful of pieces in my whole career that I've never changed, even if it was minor. Sean O'Loughlin, who I've been publishing since, you know, because he was my student, I've been publishing him since the late 90s. Even today, still every once in a while, there's a few things that we have to edit with Sean, or Sean, the form's not right, or the piece is too long. But I can tell you when I started with Sean, it was a lot. And as a matter of fact, the joke was always, back then, before computers, we would do it all in red pen and send it back in the mail. He still sometimes will send me an email and send me the file and say, awaiting the red pen, because he's used to that process, and he knows that. And a lot of people that work with me, you can ask, you know, a lot of the composers I worked with for years, they enjoy that process because they feel like at the end of the tunnel that the piece is better. And then to answer your question about, you know, how encouraging we are, when you did the interview the other day, we talked about Valerie Laney Rowe. She's a awesome success story in the fact that she sent me music, and she really originally sent it to me at Carl Fisher because she said she wanted feedback. She just was starting to write, wanted some, you know, feedback. So I gave it. I said, you know, there's a lot of things here that are nice. Your melody's good, which she's still very good at writing nice, beautiful melodies. And, you know, but there were scoring issues and blah, 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 blah. So I sent all that feedback to her, and I said, I hope you'll, you know, send me some more music in the future. I didn't get it. Of course, we get busy. We review thousands of pieces over the time. And then we actually, you know, I asked Tyler to reach out to her to see if maybe she's done anything in the last 2 or 3 years since she had submitted to me at Carl Fisher. And she had, and here we are, we're going to publish 2 of her pieces. And and Valerie, like all the composers, well, even myself, we're all still works in progress. We're all still learning. And so we'll continue to try to develop, you know, people like Valerie and anybody else that we feel like there's the ability and the talent and the craft to get to the next level.
Sure. And this question is a pretty quick one. Tyler, I'll start with you. How many times do you think you would go back and forth between a composer providing that feedback until you say, okay, another time, or, oh, I think we've got it now?
Oh, that one's a fun one. Alice in Wonderland, falling down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes,
and that's the thing. If we're not going to go past the first stage of, here's what we think you can do to make your music better, if we don't think that by doing that, we can make it better or we can help them along. So what'll happen is that if I give a suggestion like, I think you need a moment, a big moment in your piece at the end, and the composer comes back and it's not quite what we were thinking, we'll go back and forth a little bit. It depends. Every piece is different. Every person is different. Some composers take direction very well, and they'll come back and they can like read your mind. And then some other composers don't take your direction real well, and they'll come back with something even cooler than you thought of. And then some composers need a lot more guidance. And so some pieces, it could be 10 back and forth emails about one section. Some it can be 1. I have not had an issue yet where on my end as an editor, I've pulled a plug on a piece once we've started. It's a journey. We're going to get it there. I have had some composers that don't like the direction pull a piece. So if they are frustrated because they can't kind of get where we want to go, that's an instance. But at least on my end so far in 2 years, I've not given up on somebody when we started.
I think everybody would agree we don't really go down that, as Tyler say, that rabbit hole unless we think the core of the piece is something that we're interested in and we think is good and can sell.
What would you say to those composers who are self-publishing? That's becoming very popular these days, with composers deciding to promote their own music and self-publishing. How are you encouraging them to publish with you, and how are you informing them of what the benefits would be for publishing with a company like yourself?
Well, I start with, we're doing a video like this to explain the process and explain how we do things, and focus in on the fact that we are focused on composers more than other publishers, I believe. And let me tell you even one more reason why. I decided that the process takes so long for a composer to get paid. I think we talked about this the other day. A lot of publishers, if you accept a piece in May, for example, for the next school year. So if we accept a piece this May, it's not going to come out until spring of 21, right? So then it'll sell all of 21. We don't actually pay them a royalty check until the end of February of 22. So it could be almost 2 years before that composer sees any money for their work. What we do is, as soon as we accept a piece, we send them a royalty advance that's recoupable on sales in the future, as a way of saying, thank you for taking a chance on us as a new publisher, but also to say, we believe in you. We know your piece is going to sell. And so here's a little money up front, so you don't have to wait forever to actually see some benefit from being with a regular publisher. The other issue, in my opinion, with self-publishing, well, is that composers haven't seen that benefit of a publisher. But the other thing is, Jamey talked about, everybody wants to write, things that are difficult, like Eric Whitacre. It's come to the point where that type of material for the normal publisher does not sell. So in some ways, it's almost more beneficial for the composer to self-publish pieces like that, because they get all of the income from that. Whereas a publisher, if it's regularly published, they only get their percentage of the royalty. But the problem is, we can't put enough of the resources behind it from a financial standpoint. Professional recordings, the time it takes to produce and engrave and print this big, large piece, it's a lot more paper, so it's more costly to produce it. We can't make any money doing that. So that's why we, make the conscious decision to focus on the lower grade levels. Now, for somebody who's self-published, it's really super difficult for them to get a middle school choir or a middle school band or orchestra to look at self-published music, because the teachers just don't have time. They go to the resources they know, maybe a J.W. Pepper or Stanton's or a Pender's website or whatever, any of the great dealers that we have, and they find that music and they buy through those normal channels. So we're doing promotion and things that's going to get the music in front of those teachers, which then makes it much, much better for them to be published with a company like us, rather than trying to self-publish a grade 1 band piece. Even though I always like to say, do you want, as a composer, do you want a lot of a little, or do you want a little of a lot? And for me as a composer, I want my music to be played as much as possible everywhere I can get it played. So I want a little of a lot, because I want more students, as Tyler said, and my pitch to him was, when you write a piece of music, you affect those students that get to play that music. You actually teach through that music. So the more people I can get to play my music, or Sean O'Loughlin's music, or Valerie Laney Rowe's music, or Carol Britton Chambers' music, the more they're teaching through that music, and the more out there. Yeah, are they going to make less money per copy? Yes, but they're going to have more proliferation of their music everywhere around the world.
I have a few more small questions before we finish up. But in my work and collaborations with composers, I'm hearing stories and interesting stories about a composer saying, oh, I've submitted this piece of music to X, Y, and Z Publishing, and I wanted the title to be The Roar of the Tiger. And the publisher came back with, no, the title's going to be Tenacity, or something like that. How often are you encouraging composers to change the titles based on what you're hearing, or are you doing that on your own end and saying, if this wants to be published, this is the title we're suggesting. How does that work?
Can I go on that one?
Sure.
You can.
Okay, so one of the things, again, with back to what Larry was saying about self-publishing versus not, and wanting to make sure that your stuff can be seen at whatever levels, because, and to piggyback off that real quick, I won't take that much. I think there's a place for publishing and self-publishing, because with the saturation of the market in general, especially for younger people coming up, the avenues for revenue are different in both of those areas. I've encouraged people that I know who are self-publishers to maybe publish young stuff with publishers and keep publishing their harder, more collegiate level stuff on their own, because they have those connections, and that's how you get those things out for the harder stuff. Whereas a publisher can also help get your name out in the other areas, because they have large dealer networks and your music is going to get seen on brochures, etc. So I think it's important to maybe think, if you're a composer, think about doing multiple things, not just one.
Right.
If you want an example, you can look at one of our newer composers, Brooke Pearson. His harder stuff is self-published. His younger stuff, he's publishing with publishers. And it's just kind of like having different modes of income, real estate or stuff like that. But back to your question, which remind me, what was it again? I got myself off.
Okay.
It was a really good question too.
I'll still answer it, I promise.
If a composer comes to you with a title that he or she decided upon, like The Roar of the Tiger, and you're suggesting tenacity or something, maybe going from a few words to one word, or something that you think might have a little bit more stamina or attraction to a buyer.
So yeah, titles sell, but titles are also unique. So the first thing I do, and this is just hands up, first thing I do is I go on JW Pepper or something like Stanton's or Pender's, or something with a big search engine that can search pieces that are currently in publication that I could find. It's harder to find self-published things, but if I can find it, I go in there and I type in the person's title. So if the piece came in, it was The Roar of the Tiger, I would type in Roar of the Tiger. And if 6 or 10 of them come up, 6 concert band pieces, Roar of the Tiger, I'm gonna go back to the composer, I'm gonna say, so if you use that title, you're competing with 6 other titles of pieces. And that is going to be hard for you, especially if you're young. Like if I were to write a piece called Advancement, and then Brian Balma just had a piece called Advancement, I'm not going to be seen, because they're going to see Brian Balmages and they're going to go for that. Forgive me, Brian, if I'm saying your last name wrong. So
Balmages,
Balmages, my bad. So that syllabic stress that Jamey was talking about, my bad. So
Instrumentalists.
yeah, right. But that's one aspect, is that are they going to be competing against themselves? Are they going to be hindering themselves there? Another thing is, sometimes titles can be insensitive to certain things, and so we try and make sure that titles are not insensitive. So if there's a question at all there, I bring that up and I say, here's how this can be perceived. If you want to write something like that, I would suggest against it. Change the title. There's no reason why a title should be insensitive when it doesn't have to be. Also,
I want to make it clear that we don't say this is going to be the title.
Yeah, no. We suggest
in this publishing company and all the publishing companies I've worked for, it's always been a collaborative effort. Hey, we don't think this title's going to work. You can't call something overture in B flat. Going to get lost in the shuffle. So you try to encourage them and have them go back and forth, and just like with the editing of the piece, it's collaboration.
As an author, I've written a handful of program notes for composers, mostly for a concert band. Do you encourage your composers to have the program notes written before they submit them to you, or is that something that they're creating after their music has been selected for publication?
We don't require it for submission. We do around November ask that they submit program notes for their music that has been selected. And I'll be the first one to pop the bubble that, as you said, you were writing program notes for some composers, right?
Yeah.
I think you wrote one for Tyler Grant, right?
A few, yes.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't have my program notes written. I'll write a piece that is about nothing that I just want to write because I write for me. And then I have to create something. I have to create a program note for it. So I don't expect composers to have that ahead of time. Some do. So Peter Ciano, again, he sends in a program note with every piece he writes, first thing. So
I get the same thing from Russ Robinson. He will write a piece and have a plan for it from day one. And then I have others that saying to them, write program notes, they'll be like, why? I mean, it's there. Just sing what the notes are. And I'm like, well, let's get a little more instruction or anything. And then there are some songs that I'll get and I'll look at them and say, this has to have some sort of program note with it for multiple reasons, whether it's a translation or a pronunciation or just how this section of the song needs to work, that you have to include some sort of program notes. But I mean, a lot of that comes with experience and years. I mean, Russ knows that what his audience is. A director is going to appreciate a song that's got on the first page. Tell them how to teach the song. So and sometimes that's very helpful. And sometimes teachers don't want to read that. Sometimes teachers are like, I want to do the song the way I want to do it. That's fine too. But it's helpful sometimes to have people like him send that from day one, because
Jamey has the bug now.
World.
Right. And as an educator selecting music, I mean, let's be honest, the two things sometimes that will draw my attention to a piece before I hear it is the title, and also if there's a snippet of the program note on the website. If I relate to that piece or I have an interest in that piece, or there's a word or two in that title that reminds me of my students or what we're programming it for, sometimes I'll be interested in a piece before I even hear it. Oh, great. So anything else regarding the editing process before I get to my few final questions? Blair, would you like to share anything else?
Well, it's been pretty well covered, I think, so far.
Great. So just a few quick little things. So we talked about, promoting diversity within your composers and also within the music. Are you asking your composers to submit their names or their compositions to the Institute for Composer Diversity database so that their names and their music can be seen there? And are you aware of that?
I've never asked them to do so, but that's a wonderful idea. I think Carol Britton Chambers is on there, correct?
I believe so. I'm not sure of all of them.
Amy Pico's on there, and Jay Coles is on there because I've been on the database. I've looked. So no, that's an awesome idea to do. So no, we don't currently tell them or encourage them to do so, but it's a great idea.
Just another way for the composers to get their names out there, which in turn could get people then looking at your company and then onto your website. So if they are considered an underrepresented composer, they can submit themselves, or you actually as editors could go to the database and submit a form on behalf of your composers as well.
So I know that doesn't matter if they're published.
I'm sorry?
So they can be published composers and still be on the database?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I'll go do that. I submit our composers for state list and everything like that. So I'll totally do that. I didn't know that was a thing we could do on their behalf. That's great.
Great. And what are ways that composers, educators could get in touch with you? And are you open to composers and educators just emailing you and talking and asking questions? Jamey, would you like to start?
Well, actually, one thing that Excelcia has tried to make possible for every educator is on every piece of music, it has, Larry, tell me, meet the
QR code.
There's a barcode, and it's called Contact Composer or
Composer Connection.
Composer Connection, that's what it is. And anyone who does any of our pieces, if they're sitting there and they're thinking, oh, I would love to connect with, and there we go, Tyler's going to show us this barcode. They scan this, and it has all of our contact info in it, every composer's contact info that they could reach out. And even if it's just to say, hey, wanted to let you know that we're doing your piece and it's going well. Most of the time I'll respond and say, hey, that sounds great. I'd love to hear the final product. And I get a lot of links to final concerts of them singing something. But it also allows them, if they want to have the composer or arranger just kind of either Skype in or send in some sort of feedback. I mean, I got an email 2 days ago with a link to someone performing one of my pieces twice and asking me the differences between the two of which one I would prefer. And so, I mean, it's definitely a nice way because, I mean, Larry's talked about the fact that the publishing company is big on pushing for the composer. And it's celebrating the composer. It's not just celebrating the piece, which is nice, because then what happens is the students start to learn these names as opposed to just learning the titles. And then they look for that name in other songs. Oh, I like this person's piece. Let's do another one. Oh, I remember this person when we did that song. So it's nice to have some sort of connection for the students to see that, and for the educators to start actually even learning names, which a lot of times they'll, even as educators, sometimes just stick with titles, especially in the choral world. And so having names attached to things is really nice.
Great. Blair, are you open to those communications with educators and possibly even students and composers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's I welcome that sort of exchange. I work from home, so I'm a lot of what I do is in isolation. You know, so what the country's going through now is sort of my normal anyway. So yeah, absolutely. When people reach out, it's always great to hear from them. And I've had both sides of it. I've had people say, we love this piece, or I've had occasionally somebody say, what were you thinking? This is awful. You know, I mean, that happens, you know. So, and the one piece that well, it doesn't matter. That's a long story. But yeah, I absolutely encourage people to reach out.
And Tyler, I'm sure you'll say the same.
Absolutely. You know, we also do this new thing, which I'm proud of, so I'm just going to put it up here. We put all their social media on their scores. We want people to reach out to the composers. We want people to reach out to us. All of our emails are on the website available. So if somebody wants to, I mean, in all honesty, you could go to our submission portal, but I've also had people send me emails directly. And that's fine too. We're available. They can even call. Our numbers are there. Our extensions are there. It's open. So if somebody wants to call and ask about submitting, awesome, bring it on. Somebody wants to reach out to me on Facebook, bring it on. You know, I mean, any avenue that people can get to you. That's one of the reasons why we try and make it as available as possible. And we try and get our composers to create their own websites so we can promote it and create their own Instagrams and their own social media. We want as much availability as possible because, again, from the standpoint of me, when I started, I would look at companies and they had a set group of composers. And trying to break into that is hard, especially if it's a set group of composers. And we're unique. We don't. I mean, we have wonderful composers, but what are we, over 55 now, right?
59.
59. We have a wonderful group of composers in just 2 years, but we're not stopping not to look. We added 14 this year, I think, yep, for this catalog, and we'll add as many more next year as we can, and keep doing it. So yes, if anybody wants to reach out, reach out.
Sure. And my final question to the three of you as editors: would you ever be open to collaborations with editing, or having a guest editor come on at some point, or a composer to just get a glimpse into your profession and what you do on a daily basis? Have you ever had that happen, or would you be open to that?
We have had students who are composition majors and or interested in composition come into the office so far. But absolutely, for me, I mean, great, sure, because someone else is going to see something that I miss. And we're not always right. And when we pick music, we're coming at it from our musical sensibilities. And sometimes you know, when we reject a piece, it's not because there's something wrong with the piece. It's just many factors. And a lot of it's because it just doesn't fit the catalog, or it doesn't fit something at that time. Maybe it's a march and we already have 20 marches. So we say, well, let's hold this for next year, or let's revisit this. So absolutely, because more eyes, the better, right, Larry?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, having the composers have a better glimpse of how we do things certainly would help them in the long run as well. And like Tyler said, we've had some college students in. My plan is to start to get some music industry interns from the local college, Florida Southern College, here pretty soon too. And you know, we're wide open. If I can also add to the composer connection thing, one of the things that's really important to us is that if the composers succeed, even if they're published by other publishers or self-published part of their catalog, that only helps us too. So if we can, through that composer connection, get commissions for composers, help them get commissions, which we'd get nothing from, other than we hope that we'll publish the piece that they actually write. That ultimately helps us in the long run. The other thing is, we have started a Facebook page that's just for our composers. We talk to them about how to help them promote themselves. Tyler talked about helping them, you know, get a website and social media, and helping them on what they should post. Because a lot of composers are introverts, and they don't really know how to be self-promoting. And in this day and age of social media and stuff like that, they have to do that. But what's the coolest part about that is that the composers are interacting with each other, and they have some of them have become, you know, best friends and enjoy each other. And people put on there, oh, I just got commissioned to write a piece for choir and band. I've never written for choir before, you know, any suggestions? And the other composers will give them feedback on that. And then the other thing is, we also ask each other in that forum, you know, what do you have coming up? You know, where are you guest conducting? Where, you know, what commissions do you have? Where are your premieres? And again, we don't care if they're premieres and commissions and honor groups or whatever that were set up by other publishers. We actually then take all that information and put it on our events page on our website, because again, the better we are at promoting that composer becoming, you know, well known, the better it is for us in the long run.
Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. Thank you for what you're doing within our profession. I encourage you to continue promoting diversity within the music that you're having and the composers that you're bringing in. And thanks for this delightful conversation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that educators and students, and most importantly, future composers, will look at this as an opportunity to hear what the process is like and to attempt to get their work out there. And hopefully you'll see more coming through.
Absolutely.
Congratulations to all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori.
Bye-bye.